Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of The Hunt. It is good to be back. It felt very weird watching this from the other side of the camera last week, but George and Kat, special shout out to you guys for an awesome show last week. And thanks for all those tuning in today. So for those who haven't watched, The Hunt is all built on providing a forum for job seekers and hiring managers to be able to get insight on real-time situations that you face every day when either looking for a job or hiring. As recruiting consultants over the years, we've developed such a pipeline of amazing insight and feedback that we want to share with you. So this is meant to be an interactive show. I encourage everyone from wherever you're watching to throw your comments in throughout the show. If you have questions, ideas, thoughts, I'd love to create more of a brainstorming session throughout these episodes, especially today with what is a very hot topic. So for those that haven't watched before, my name is Kevin Roth. I am a director of recruiting at Advice, a full-service recruiting agency serving New York for over 35 years. And today we are touching on a hot topic. Man, whenever you bring up salary, it is always contentious. I already saw a few comments flooding in our initial post when we talked about what we're going to speak on this week. And it's a real interesting area of compensation because we're talking about taking a pay cut when working remotely. And it's a topic that's been so prominent that I actually was looking at the Wall Street Journal, which I don't actually read. I usually use the crossword puzzles. But if you looked at the front page, one of the main stories was about people taking pay cuts to work from home and to work in different parts of the country. And a lot of people are unhappy. So today we're going to touch on that. And I don't know if a lot of you out there, people watching, are dealing with that situation right now. If you are, again, please chime in with your comments and we'll make this as interactive as we possibly can. And I always save time at the end of the show to get to some questions. So, without further ado, let's jump right into this. So, I mean, we've all thought about it, right? You're living in, say, New York or San Francisco. You're paying a fortune to live in your 500 square foot apartment. And you moved there because you had to be close to these companies that you were dreamed of working for. And the only way you could work for them is if you lived in the area. So now you're at this company, you're fully remote, company has no plans of going back anytime soon, your lease is coming up, and you're thinking, what if I move to like South Dakota or, near a national park with beautiful scenery and land and a 5,000 acre spread, paid half the amount, still made the same money, still worked for the same company, and it would be amazing to have that quality of life. So unfortunately, we've realized that, well, that's a great dream. It's not so cut and dry in a lot of situations, and a lot of companies out there are starting to enforce policies that they're encouraging you to work from wherever you want in the country, but there will be some sort of compensation adjustment to account for whatever the market is in that area. So the question becomes, and a lot of people are really upset about, is that fair? If it's my choice, you guys are remote and I'm moving, is it really fair for me to have to take a pay cut just because I want to enjoy a greater quality of life? So that's what we're going to touch on today. And again, I hope to get some comments from everybody throughout the show to challenge me and give me different takes. But I want to start by going through both sides of the argument because I know a lot of people that watch this show are job seekers. And you see it from the job seeking perspective. And I know a lot of you would love for me to sit here and rant for 20 minutes like I can do about how unfair and unethical it is to be asked to take a pay cut in this situation. But I pride this show on being very objective as much as I can be, except when I talk about movies or sports. And I want to give both perspectives because a lot of people don't think about it from both sides of the equation. And there are definitely a lot of things to take into account before you get really upset and have a heated argument or really get yourself thinking about making a move. So firstly, I want to really talk about it from the employee side of things. All right, so as I mentioned, you're looking to take advantage of this. You have New York salary, you're living here, but you're not really going to work. So if you could move to a different place, take advantage of that. So what's the argument on that side if you're making an argument against your company? So theoretically, if your company is remote regardless, right? They have no plans of going back to the office. They're fully remote, and you're simply choosing to locate yourself in a different area. It's not changing anything about your work habits, not changing anything about your working style. So why should you be penalized for just choosing to base yourself out of a different spot? And if you didn't even inform the company, just as an experiment, and have been working in a different market for weeks now and it hadn't changed and they didn't even notice, if you could do something like that, why should you be taking a hit on your salary if that's the case? And to go along with that, another major argument that I'm hearing from a lot of employees is cost savings. I read an article the other day about a few major tech giants that did a study that it costs them $20,000 per employee on average. If you average out the whole population when everyone's working in the office, that number drops to $2,000 per employee if everyone's remote. So you have an $18,000 per employee cost savings just by someone working remote. So technically the company's benefiting from you working remote. They're saving money there and also looking to adjust salaries based on where you're moving to. So they're making out pretty good. So from an employee side, those are the arguments that I'm hearing. And those of you watching are saying, yes, Kevin, preach. That's exactly what we're talking about. That's why there's no argument we should not be taking pay cuts. But let's see it from the company's perspective. Okay, compensation, the word compensation, compensate. You're being compensated not only for the services that you're offering, but you're being compensated based on what you're putting in, your cost of living, your commute to work. All of those things are factored in. So if you're being compensated based on a position that you took while you were working in the New York office that required you to live in New York, a company is compensating you for the cost of what it takes to be a worker in New York. So if you're moving to a different state, why should you still be compensated at the same rate? So that's the main argument that I'm seeing from a lot of the company's perspective. And are they getting taken advantage of that you're moving to North Dakota and they're still paying you as a New York employee on a New York salary? That part doesn't necessarily make logical sense. I used to live in Orlando, and we had the Orlando outlets. And I remember people would come from international countries throughout Europe, and they would load up on clothing, shoes, all these things. And I remember asking someone one time, they were like, we get this for pennies on the dollar versus what we pay back home overseas. So by that same logic, if you flip the script, and I make a very controversial analogy here, if in that same scenario, when you came to Orlando to shop, you were charged the rate of where you live. So even though Orlando, if you lived there, you were paying a certain price, but because you came from overseas, you have to pay the price that you would pay if you were still back home. That would sound pretty ridiculous, right? So the same holds true as an employee. If you're moving to a lesser area, if the company theoretically hired someone in that market, they'd be paying market salary. So should you really benefit from your New York salary that you're grandfathered in if you move to anywhere in the country? All right, so hopefully you see both sides of that argument. And it also, there's some hidden costs there from a company. Say they have plans of, they want you in the office at least, once a month or every few weeks for a couple of days. Now, if you're living in a different part of the country, there's travel involved, there's airfare, hotel, maybe food stipends. So these things are now adding up, and they're hidden costs that you're not thinking about when you're thinking how much the company's making out like a bandit. So there are very objective perspectives to both sides. And what you really have to figure out is, how do these things apply to your particular situation? And again, if you're dealing with this right now, throw your comments in there. Ask questions. If you're wondering how to face this or how to approach this with a boss, or you're dealing with a certain specific situation around this, use the comments right now. Let's talk about it live and really make it more interactive so that it applies to your particular scenario. But in terms of what you're thinking about, how to approach this, and am I in a fair situation? Should I be upset? Should I be, taking this in stride? There's a great scene in The Departed, to use my usual movie analogy, where I learned a nice Latin phrase called cui bono. And cui bono is used more in criminal situations where it means who benefits, who had most to gain by this taking place. And that's the way you have to break down how much you should push and nudge on this whole argument. Because in a lot of cases, maybe the company has more logic than you do in terms of why you should be taking this reduction. So who benefits? Think about yourself. Are you just trying, honestly, if you look yourself in the mirror, are you just trying to beat the system here? And knowing that you're on a New York salary, you move to another state, it'd be great. Let's keep my New York salary. And I make out like a bandit here. I have a 20% reduction in cost of living. I'm maintaining the same salary. That's like getting a 20% raise just for moving. So thinking about that, are you really doing this just to game the system? Or is there some other underlying factors that are really prompting this? So think through that. In terms of who benefits, cui bono, is your company just trying to double dip? Are they taking advantage of a situation where they can save money on an employee and also cut your salary just to increase the bottom line? Or is there real logic behind this? Are they trying to justify having you still on board? Well, not necessarily looking elsewhere because now they can get a remote population who's much less expensive. So thinking about all those things is important first and figuring out how you want to battle this. Next, once you think about who benefits, if you're on the employee side, ask for answers. Okay, so those who are watching saying, my company's enforcing this, my boss just told me I can move, but there's going to be an adjustment, or retroactively, they're now trying to adjust it. Don't just take it in stride and vent about it, get frustrated, start looking for a new job, feel like you're not respected. Ask them about it. Get a sense of what's the logic behind this. Why am I being asked to take this? Is it just because I moved and you guys it's cost of living, or what's the real reasoning? And get to the root of it and see if there's a logical explanation. See if maybe they're getting pressure because now that they can work remotely, they're seeing people from all over the country that are making way less than you are, and it needs to make certain fiscal sense to still have you there working remote. Maybe it is a situation where they want people eventually back in the office and need to travel, and now they're looking at another, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year in expenses to fly you out, set you up in a hotel when you're there. So get an understanding, have that discussion, and don't just take it in stride. Always remember, we talked about this a lot. It is more expensive for a company to replace you than it is to retain you. Having said that, that's to a certain extent. So if the cost to replace you is 10%, but they're paying you 40% above market now, and they can get someone for 40% less who does the same exact role with the same exact pedigree, then that's where that scale starts to shift. So before you play hardball and really try to push the envelope, think about the market you're going to, think about the percentage discrepancy there between how much ahead of market am I really now, and am I setting myself up for having a magnifying glass on my back because there's going to be these amazing people that they can now get for $30,000 less than me who have the exact same background that I do. How can a company justify that? So again, if you're an employee facing this, and please throw your questions in here if you're having certain situations that you're dealing with and that you're facing. I'd love to get to them. But if you're an employee facing this, don't just accept it. If you're really upset about it, have the conversation. Ask for answers. What's the logic behind this? Why am I being asked to do this? And really listen objectively, because a lot of times these companies will make points that make a lot of logical sense. And lastly, really keep in mind the competitive nature of the world that we're operating in now. You're not just competing with people in one geographic area, you're competing with talent across the country. And if you're making a 40% premium above that market, that's something that a company has to look into. Whether they love you or not, that's just smart business sense. On the contrary, and we'll get to questions at the end, we got a few good questions trickling in now, so please throw your questions in before we wrap up for today. But from the company perspective, you better get ahead of this. This has been prominent enough where it's been trending on LinkedIn. It has been in the front page of the Wall Street Journal. People are unhappy just being told that this is the case. So you better have a logical reason. We're doing a Hunt episode on it now. And once something makes it mainstream, that it ends up on the Hunt, it's a pretty hot topic from what I've been told, at least from our followers. So think about this before you roll out. And even if you rolled it out already, as a company, as a manager, should be having discussions internally. How are we going to frame this? If people are unhappy, what's the logic? How are we going to approach it? Is it really just because we are trying to take advantage of the system? And if so, we might want to approach things in a different way. But is there real reasoning? We do want people in the office, but we want people to live a great lifestyle, so we're willing to do this, but it's a give and take. That makes a lot more sense than just saying this is the way it is because you're moving to a new city. So really, as a company, you have to think about it. It has to be fair. It has to be justified because people are talking, employees are questioning, and there's not enough of that communication happening right now, and it's creating a lot of confusion and uncertainty around this whole thing. And lastly, look at the economics and prepare a plan that shows compromise. Similar to what I mentioned on the employee side of things, if you're having an employee move to an area that's 30% below market. You're also saving a ton. We talked about the $20,000 to $2,000 discrepancy in office versus at home. So you're saving a ton of money potentially in overhead. Then maybe it's not fair to just adjust them to the exact cost of living. Let's say, all right, so that's the cost of living is 20% below where you're at, but we're saving a good amount. So what if we meet in the middle and we give you a 10% reduction? You essentially net out with a great raise because you're having a 20% cut in your cost of living, but only losing 10% in your pay. That's essentially a 10% raise if you think about it, all things considered. So find a way to meet in the middle as a company. Think about the economics of it before you just treat an employee as if they're a consumer good, where, oh, because this is now based here, we're adjusting your salary from this to this. This is a human nature. There has to be a more psychological approach to it. And if you're in HR and you're in that world, you have to think about it that way. All right, so last closing thoughts, some final food for thought before we get to any questions. And again, if you're facing this right now and you're wondering about how to approach it, please use this forum, chime in, and I'd love to give you as much perspective as I can. Some final food for thought. First thing you should be thinking about before you push the envelope, how indispensable are you? If they realize how well everyone in the company is able to work remotely, isn't it likely that they're going to start realizing that there's talent out there that they can pull from middle America where it's way lower cost of living. People are willing to take way less, save the company a fortune overall, but if they like you. So find that balance. And as I mentioned, it's always more expensive to find and train a new person than retain an existing one, but that ends at a certain extent. And if you're 40% above market and they can find people for that much cheaper, then maybe it's a 10% incremental cost to train a new person, but 40% difference in who they're getting. That's a 30% net positive in the direction of finding a new employee. So think about that before you really push the envelope. Secondly, think about how much are you really saving by moving to this new place, and will you make out even better with the reduction? Change your mindset. Don't think of it as a pay cut. As I mentioned, if I go from New York to, what's a good example? I guess Tennessee, not to pick on Tennessee, but I imagine it's pretty inexpensive compared to New York. So let's say Tennessee's a 20% cut on where I'm living now. And my company is telling me they're going to adjust my salary by 10%. That's a raise, not a pay cut. You can't think of it in that context. You are making out, saving 20% on cost of living, only losing 10% of your salary. You're making a 10% adjusted raise increase. Or on your adjusted gross income, or however you want to look at adjusted spending power, whatever the proper terminology. So change your mindset and don't think of it that they're taking money out of your pocket. Think of it that you're netting out in a positive overall. But you should still fight for yourself and still make sure there's a logical argument behind it and that it makes sense. Last thing, food for thought, make it a conversation. Don't just take this in stride, rally with your peers. Everyone's upset, get up in arms, have the discussion. Come to a mutually beneficial agreement. Let them hear your side, hear their side. And you'd be surprised how much logic there is on both sides of the equation. It's not just a company trying to save the bottom line. All right, so hopefully that gives some great perspective. We did get a great question here, or a great, topic, actually, a tip for everyone out there. So people should look in their offer letters or employment agreements to see if there are any policies that an employee may not realize they signed as it pertains to living within a certain radius of employment. So in terms of everything I just shared, don't throw it out the window. But if you have one of these agreements in place, those agreements are structured so that everyone's on the same page. So look through your contract as well. It's a great point from that viewer that you should look through your agreement, especially bigger companies that are based in certain markets that are used to this happening. Those things will be in your agreement. So definitely take a look through it and make sure you're on top of that before you even start having these conversations. But I hope this was helpful. A lot of people out there thinking about doing this. I myself, thinking about doing it, I just can't seem to leave Brooklyn. I just love it too much, paying the premium for what I do. My sister just bought a beautiful home in Florida. I think it's like 3,000 square feet. And it's, I think, less expensive than I paid for my 1,000 square foot condo in the middle of Brooklyn. So we're all thinking about it. If you can do it, it's an amazing opportunity to get a greater quality of life, get a bigger home for your family, different school districts, whatever it might be. And don't be so quick to get offended if the compensation doesn't offset or if there's a little adjustment to be made. Find out the logic, have the conversation, and you'd be surprised how much the silver lining can seem positive versus the initial gut instinct of negative. All right, so that wraps up another episode of The Hunt. I hope everybody really got some value and enjoyed it. If you have questions throughout the week, please throw them in the comments. I'll be getting to them. I know it's tough to jump aside during the middle of a Thursday, but hopefully you guys got some value out of this one. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode with another pressing topic in the recruiting space. And until then, like us, follow, share, comment on LinkedIn, but definitely follow Advice on LinkedIn for more content around the job search and hiring. Hope everyone has a great rest of the week and an awesome weekend, and hope maybe you spend the weekend exploring some awesome houses in some other parts of the country. All right, that does it for another episode of The Hunt. Take care. Thanks for watching. Follow us on LinkedIn.